What things concern you worst moving forward for those still involved? If you could give one simple warning to those involved, what would you say? My biggest concern is the temptation to defend an institution over individuals. Right now there's a podcast that's 3 episodes into its release, out of 6 main episodes that will be released, telling the stories of some of my friends and what they went through and things that I was pretty intimately involved with some of the stuff, especially episode 6. And I'm concerned that some people just won't listen in the first place. And beyond the podcast, in general, when people tell their stories, my concern is that people excuse or downplay or dismiss or recontextualize mistreatment that happens to people. So on one hand, my concern is that some people might listen and start believing and then try to raise their voice, and they're going to experience what the rest of us experienced when we tried to raise our voice, when we witnessed people we loved being mistreated. My journey out of the place started when a friend came to me because they were having a hard time, and they told me things they were going through. My response to this friend was, I haven't experienced anything like that, but I can listen to your story and I can believe you. Everything changed for me when I decided to listen to my friend and believe their story. The things that were happening to my friend were happening in plain sight, but until you knew what to look for, it wasn't apparent. I realized a lot of things were happening in plain sight that I wasn't seeing because I wasn't paying attention. The schedule there keeps you incredibly busy. It's a 48-hour-a-week commitment minimum as a full-time staff member. And on top of that, you're trying to afford doing it. There's a constant demand to do more, to be involved in more and more and more. And in all that busyness, your attention gets pulled in every different direction. Even my supposedly sacred trust hours were constantly interrupted by last-minute emergency meetings that were mandatory to be pulled into with leaders inside rooms. My free time outside of my sacred trust commitment would constantly be interrupted with meetings that were being called that I was required to attend, and it was always more than 48 hours a week commitment. In all that busyness, it can be really hard to make the time to stop and hear the cries of people around you that are being hurt. It doesn't leave a lot of time to critically examine teachings in an environment where they have you drinking from a fire hose, or to connect the dots that some of those teachings tend to line up with external problems that the organization is facing. So, for example, there was a controversy with a group of former leaders called the Joy Boys. And they started to get a following from a lot of people who were at IHOPKC, even though they had left IHOPKC. One of the leaders of IHOPKC called them into a meeting and was trying to tell them what they can and can't teach. And around that time, the sermon series suddenly changed into a series on grace and false grace. And it was basically trying to debunk what their teachings were. And I'm sure leadership sees this as being pastoral, but you got to look at it from a different angle for a second. So I want to refer you to Noah DeBolt at DeBolt Drumming on Instagram, and I think he's on here too. He recently came forward to talk about how he was spiritually abused at Dwelling Place by Alan Scott and Jeremy Riddle. And there was an investigation that found a pattern of spiritual abuse against him and others in that organization. And one of the ways that this abuse was being perpetuated was from the platform, with sermons being given that kind of end up unifying the congregation against being able to hear the victims. And it's basically a preemptive strike to set a stage against a victim being able to come forward and speak. Now, I can't confirm that this is what's happening, but I find the timing very interesting with International House of Prayer suddenly uploading a lot of content where they're preaching about betrayal. And I noticed this shift occurred around the time they would have been contacted by the person making this podcast, contacting them for comment. I can't prove anything, but the timing is suspicious for me. And with other things I've watched happen when I was still there, when Mike was preaching against false grace and basically tearing down what the Joy Boys were talking about, it's suspicious. And I can't help but wonder if this is priming those there to not be able to hear. Because I know the effect it had on me when I was there. And I know that once I started to kind of connect dots with controversies I knew were happening in the community and sudden shifts in how things were being talked about from the platform, it starts to just be suspect. And so I would say that's one of the things I'm most concerned about, is that those who are there will stop up their ears to the cries of legitimate grievances that people are trying to raise, and that one day they're going to be the one with the grievance who's not being heard, and they're going to experience what the rest of us have gone through. And I don't wish that sense of isolation on anyone. So I guess what I would say is take the time to stop and listen. Just ask yourself, what if? And at least entertain the idea. A faith that's built on truth can withstand scrutiny.